Sorry for the confusion over the lessons. I picked two, which is against the rules, but I asked for Dr. Mannering to yell. And the reason I picked two is because these are stories. And human beings think in story. Human beings think in story. If you think about your favorite movie or your favorite book, could be a comic book, could be War and Peace, you'll know why I say this. Stories draw us in. They help us identify and connect with the characters and with their experiences. And if you think about your own life, it makes even more sense. Our lives are stories too. And that's why hearing stories helps us to understand. Understand an event, understand an idea, understand a person. Now, Jesus knew this. He's probably, we could debate this, but he's probably the most famous storyteller in history, certainly in Western history. He had 1,000 years of stories to draw on, and he also told many of his own stories. Today we heard very briefly two stories about Jesus. One about the disciples and some children who wanted to approach him, and one about a centurion, a Roman army officer, who did approach him. In both of these cases, we are supposed to be surprised at the outcome. In the first one, the disciples, now the disciples, remember, these are the followers of Jesus. They're the ones who are supposed to get it, right? They're the in crowd. They're supposed to know what's going on. But in the first case, the disciples think that Jesus does not want the children bothering him, so they try to send them away. Jesus' response is not what they expect. Not only does he tell them to let the children come, but he implies that the disciples have something to learn from those children. In the other story, a Roman officer approaches Jesus. Now, you have to dial back in time and use your imagination. Even if you've heard this story a million times before, or if you've never heard it, you have to think like if you were one of the original hearers of this story in first century Palestine. If that was the case, this story would amaze you, because most likely you would have thought of Roman soldiers as at best oppressors, and as at worst the enemy. They were occupying troops in Israel. Just like today we flip on the television in so many places in the world, we see armed soldiers in occupation in countries around the world. No different. So here's one of those soldiers, an officer, who approaches Jesus and asks him to heal his servant. Jesus, seeing his faith, does so. And then he upholds the man as an example to others. This is not the outcome to this story that we expect. Now, in both of these stories, what we think we know about others is not correct. And it's really not what we should be thinking. Children don't know anything and should be kept out of important business, right? The Roman soldier is an oppressor who will persecute Jesus and his followers, right? Well, turns out we're wrong. We have an image in our head, and that's what guides us, even if it's not really accurate. We put others into a box, and there they stay. Does that sound familiar? We do it all the time. We all do. One example, and I got permission to do this. Mr. Homer's a football coach, right? So he must be a jock. Box. Mr. Homer. In. Well, sure, he may be a jock, but did you know that Mr. Homer is a really, really smart guy who is passionately interested in history and the world around him? Did you know he's one of the best people in Christchurch to have lunch or dinner with, in my opinion? Because you're sure to end up talking about something totally interesting and unexpected? Well, I didn't know that when I arrived here, but I've learned it over time, and I've been enriched. Now, sometimes in order to get by in life, we have to put people in boxes. It's inevitable. But when we do, we can lose so much of what others have to give. A philosopher named Martin Buber describes this in one of my favorite books, called I and Thou. He said, we have two types of relationships in our lives. On the one hand, we see other people and objects as things we need, as objects to help us get what we want. We put them in a box. And again, we do it all the time. When you go to Walmart, you don't get to know the checkout clerk as a person, or at least most of us don't. In fact, if you think about it, Walmart is busily replacing those clerks with machines so you can check out things all by yourself. You know, bleep, bleep, remove item from bagging area. A lot of us have had that experience. Well, that machine or that person fulfills a function, serves our needs, and that's about it. Buber called that type of interaction an I-it relationship, because when that happens, we are treating others like an object, as an it. Now, that's okay sometimes, but as Buber says, it's not enough. If that kind of relationship is all that we have, then, just like those machines at Walmart, you're all alone. We're not really relating. We're not really meeting the other person. And as Buber says, all real living is meeting. Think about that. All real living is meeting. We need a different kind of relationship. One in which we relate to others not as we need them, but as they are in themselves. Not in our box, but as a real person whose gifts can enrich our lives. We need to meet the other. Buber called this kind of relationship an I-thou relationship, because in it we discover something sacred. Now, I'm supposed to be talking about what the Christchurch School Community means to me. That was my assignment. And I am getting there. Christchurch is a place where those kinds of relationships can happen. Of course, we have the other kind as well. But this is a place where we hope to make the I-thou relationship possible. We talk in our mission about each of us being of infinite value. Part of what that means is that we each have infinite potential. And it is through relationships where we allow others to be who they are, rather than what we would like them to be for us, that we can discover that potential in each other and in ourselves. When we take the risk of knowing someone as they are, as a thou, then we discover something new. We grow through that meeting, and so does the other. Christchurch is a place where we want very much for that to happen, and I know that it does happen. And there is something very special about that. This is a place, if you will believe it, where we can find the eternal. In my opinion, you're not going to find God out there somewhere, but right here between us, in the genuine relationships that we form, where, as Buber says, the parallel lines of relations meet. Now I know, if you were to ask Mr. Bloom, I'm picking on the faculty this morning, if you were to ask Mr. Bloom, who's teaching geometry, he would tell you that parallel lines cannot meet. And he would be right. But in this case, Mr. Buber says that they can. When our parallel lives intersect in a meaningful way, and we find infinite value in each other. That's what makes our stories worth sharing and hearing right here at Christchurch School.